Right. Hello, everyone. I hope you're all well. My name is Santana Shipley, and I'm the Community Operations Manager with the IAGA. I just want to start off by thanking you all for attending today's webinar on if your member courses are ready for adaptive golf events and introduce our panelists today. We have Dave Barton, National Alliance Executive Director, Jan Beljan, National Alliance Board Member and Past President, and Frank Frittar, National Alliance Education Consultant. Again, huge appreciation for everyone's attendance today, and I will go ahead and swing things over to Dave to get us kicked off.
Hey, well, thank you, Santana, and good afternoon, everyone. And Jan, thanks for participating and help us out today, as well as you, Frank. And we're going to go ahead and get started here with the brief video. I'm going to take myself off of the screen until we come back for a Q&A, and I will look forward to chatting with you at the end. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the chat window, and Frank will be keeping track of those, and we'll be able to answer those at the end. This will be a little bit of a refresher and review for some of you who are able to attend the first webinar, but we'll gloss over that pretty quickly and then get into what we want to talk about today, which is if your courses are ready for adaptive golfers and golf events, really. And so we're going to talk about the self-assessment process that we've developed by using a lot of great resources that were out in the world for us to kind of assemble and simplify your access and understanding what those are. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started with a very brief introduction of who we are.
Golf. It's a sport enjoyed by millions of people around the globe. Through the power of the game of golf, individuals with disabilities can build confidence, grow relationships with friends and family, and experience a sense of health and wellness that extends far beyond the course. The National Alliance for Accessible Golf continues to serve as the golf industry resource to help increase the participation of people with disabilities in the game of golf. Since establishing a grant program in 2010, the National Alliance for Accessible Golf has awarded over $1 million to programs around the country, providing avenues to play for individuals with disabilities. The National Alliance remains committed to serving as an education, advocacy, and resource center in promoting access and inclusion in golf for all. To learn more and join our community, visit us online at accessgolf.org.
Okay, great. Well, again, good afternoon. And I'm Dave. And as mentioned, I've been with the Alliance for just about 3 years. Just a brief summary about me. I came out of the golf industry, still in the golf industry, excuse me, came out of a Navy career, been in the golf industry since about 2005. Managed properties up in the Northern Virginia area as an operator and a PGA professional. So hopefully what I bring to the organization is that operational background with management of golf courses and understanding many of those elements required. And I can safely say that I wish I knew more about what I'm talking about today a few years ago when I was managing properties. Jan will have a chance to speak about herself in a moment, but Jan, of course, is one of my board members who I answer to, past president of the ASGCA, and just an amazing resource for us to have available to what we talk about most, which is environments, both physical and environmental. Obviously, we couldn't deliver the education without some great supporters, Kafka Granite and Wadsworth Golf Foundation, excuse me, as well as the Wadsworth Golf Construction Company. And we've been supported by a leading golf industry association since our founding in 2001. And that allows us to deliver this at no cost, which is a good thing as far as I'm concerned. We did our first webinar on the 15th, which was really just kind of an introduction to volunteer and staff training. Today, we're going to talk about the self-assessment. And then when we wrap it up on the 16th, we'll go over the onboarding series where you can earn education credits if you're in some of the golf associations around the country. We'll talk about that in more detail in just a moment. And this does all lead up to us doing a panel in Monterey. We'll have some interesting guests on there to have a little conversation, and then a sidebar after the fact, talking about access and inclusion in the game of golf and how we can all help each other out. So today we're going to, go over mission again, talk about what accessible and inclusive really mean. Jan's going to get into some of the barrier-free elements of the self-assessment. We'll talk about how to do it, and we'll talk about your roles and responsibilities as operators or those that help operators understand what their requirements are, related to the Americans with Disabilities Act and the law. Established in 2001, there were some working groups in the mid-90s when the ADA came out. Folks realized that the ADA addressed mostly the built environment. It didn't address a lot of things that were dirt related, such as a campground or a golf course or a park. It addressed the buildings that may have supported those, but it didn't address the actual terrain and the elements that were part of that. So the golf course itself was not really addressed from a design standpoint or a barrier standpoint until many years later, and we'll get into that later in the discussion. We've been very fortunate to have great support from a lot of the golf associations, most of the leading golf associations since we started, with special notice to the USGA, who, with some of their funding, helped us deliver a grant program over the last 10 or 15 years. And we've given away about $1 million since 2010. And we're really hoping to get that grant program started back up in 2025. And its primary focus is to support, programs that have the opportunity for folks with disabilities to get into the game and learn to play. And other than that, we're certainly involved with therapeutic and healthcare, and we're working to bring more of those individuals into the game as well, because they're very valuable to golf programs and in getting folks interested in playing. So our focus is we are an education and advocacy organization. Number one, that's what we do. Our goal is to educate the golf industry, primarily owners and operators, on how to create more accessible and inclusive places where people can learn to play. We do that through working with owners and operators and speaking at events such as the PGA show, GCSA coming up, and of course IAGA. So we're very fortunate to have the opportunity to do that. We're a little bit unique in this space as far as many of the organizations around the country. We don't run programs or competitions. We support them, but we're all about creating places, as we mentioned earlier, where people can learn to play. Competitions are great and they show people what's possible, but we are all about bringing golfers into the game as our priority. And I spoke about the grant program already, and we're hoping to get that going again. So what's the difference between access and inclusion? And of course, why does that matter? So briefly, access is related to design elements, barrier-free environments. Can you get to point A from point B without having to go around something? Is there a ramp where there should be a ramp instead of steps? Can a golfer get to the golf course from the parking lot to the 18th hole without tripping over anything or having to go around anything? That's what access is. And so that's predominantly a physical consideration, right? Mostly physical, barrier removal, and those sorts of things. Inclusion is what you get when you have these environments that allow people to access your facility. And so that deals more with the cultural aspects, the environmental aspects of the club, as far as what the leadership and staff has in place to create a welcoming environment through your actions, which is with policies, procedures, how you talk with people. Do you understand disability etiquette and communications? And so that's kind of what the inclusion is. And so I'll talk mostly about that today with some of the things I address with the self-assessment, whereas Jan will get into some of the barrier-free elements as part of her presentation. And just brief numbers, there's a big audience out there that is capable of playing golf that may not know they're capable of playing golf yet. There's also a lot of that used to play, about 6 million that don't play anymore. And so it raises the question, why? Was it a lack of equipment? Did their disability just reach a point where they could not play golf anymore? Or are they just not able to find enough places to play? And we do believe the places are out there. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we all know that the rehabilitative and therapeutic value of golf is there. And so that's one of the big selling points, quite honestly, these days. So GiA&x is what I want to just remind you about first. I would encourage you to join GiA&x. GiA&x is a free platform that we offer. It's a networking platform. It's also where we house most of our resources, and I'll show you some screenshots of that in just a moment. But it's just really a place for engaging and asking questions. We get a lot of phone calls. We got a lot of emails. And on GiA&x, you'll find experts on the ADA, experts in golf. You'll also find golfers who have answers to questions for other golfers. So it's just a great place to get involved in the adaptive golf community. There's a community calendar that, some of the AGAs have started to use to put their adaptive golf tournaments on there and their events and programming. And so we'd encourage you to do that, because again, the more we all know around the country about what's going on, the easier it is to conflict that, but also just kind of show everybody what's going on. And so, anybody that's on game can use that calendar and put events and programs in. So we would encourage you to do that. And then we've got conversation topics that come up pretty regularly that are often very intriguing, and we welcome your inputs into answering those questions or asking a question that you would like an answer to. So again, it's free, just needs a username and password. Here's what you see when you get to GAIN, just briefly. You can get to the Alliance Education Hub through GAIN. You can also access the Education Hub for all this material we're talking about through our public website, accessgolf.org. There's a clear drop down there to see on the nav menu. So you can get to the Education Hub in either of those two places. And then as you can see, that's where the calendar access as well. So if you're a GAIN subscriber, you can put your programs, your events in there, whatever you want to do. Here's the bottom part of the GAIN landing page. And I wanted to show you this more specifically because you can see the topics and conversations on the left. That's just a couple of examples. There are more current topics than that right now. But on the right is all of our resources. That's where we have our newsletter, Golf Inclusion Monthly, program and facility listens around the country, whether they have adaptive carts or not. We're really trying to work on that list to get it ramped up. And then we've also got some policy templates on there for some of the more common scenarios that come up at a golf course related to golfers with disabilities, which includes cart path only scenarios, service animals, and things of that nature. And also there's a couple accessibility statements on there, which is a great way to communicate to your organizations or to your, to your golfers that your facility is a welcoming place to come. And I'll tell you, the website's the first place most people go, as you know, and we just can't overemphasize enough the importance of golf courses having their accessibility features accented on their website, whether they do or do not have an adaptive cart yet, what their handicap flag policies are. We prefer as the access flags. And so some of those things are really, really helpful to help individuals know that they're a place that you can come play. We'll talk about private and public clubs here a little bit later. But again, there is a subtle difference there with the ADA related to those in some situations. The Education Hub, today we're going to talk mostly about the self-assessment process, which is on the Education Hub, easy to find. And we'll talk about bullet 1 there in session 3. We also offer micro-learning lessons, which are short 5-minute video lessons, which are basically frequently asked questions that have been answered with videos, discussion, and/or scenario formats that are a great place to go just to get a quick taste of common scenarios that'll happen at the golf course counter. And then our education, at least the onboarding series, is approved by the PGA, GCSA, LPGA, and CMA for education credits if you do the onboard training series. So it's a great way to pick up 2 or 3 education credits and help yourself out there. So on the hub, so when it comes to how do you get to the self-assessment, how do you find what you need? Once you go to the Education Hub, whether you get there through GAIN or whether you get there through our public website, the majority of the folks in this room are going to select that first box I've got highlighted, which is golf facility staff, professionals, coaches, and AGAs. That's where all the golf operations and ADA information is related to managing golf properties. Volunteer training is something we talked about in the first session. That's where if you're having an adaptive golf event, that's where you would want to send your volunteers to do a quick 30-minute video training, a video session, a lesson with some video training and some scenarios regarding disability etiquette and communications. And so it's a great little way to ensure that everybody, both competitors and your volunteers, have a positive experience at your event. And we're working hard on the healthcare professionals section right now. We're working to ramp that up just a little bit to make that a little more enticing for healthcare professionals to draw them more into the game, to increase their involvement with programs at golf facilities. Because what we've seen is that when healthcare professionals, whether they're recreational therapists or physical therapists, are involved with golf programs, the golf programs tend to grow and they tend to be a little more successful. All right, so Title II and Title III of the ADA applies to government, state, and or public accommodations, which you can see there. So most of the area that we work in is in the Title II and Title III space, predominantly Title III, public golf courses that are not private. Private golf facilities may not be susceptible to the ADA, but it's possible that a private facility is required to comply with Title III ADA compliance if they operate like a public accommodation, which could include things as simple as hosting routine golf tournaments on Monday for the public as a revenue generator, hosting weddings on a regular basis for folks other than the members. And so just a little advice there, if you hear an individual that is working at a private club suggest the 80 doesn't apply to them, that may be the case. It may not be the case. And we just talked about that right there, which if you act like a public accommodation, you could be treated as a Title III accommodation in the eyes of the ADA, even if you're a private club. And it depends on how much the public is getting access to your facility. And that doesn't mean the public as a guest of a member. It means public events that are held sometimes as revenue generators at private clubs. So to do the self-assessment, this is a process that we created about a year ago. We launched it last January to really just simplify a way a golf course could take an assessment of yourself, of your golf course, to know where do you stand? Where do you stand related to the ADA? What are you doing great? And where are your opportunities for improvement, right? That's all it comes down to. We're not the DOJ. We're not an enforcement agency. The self-assessment is not a certification. It's really just an indicator that you've taken a step, or you're taking the steps to just, take a fair look at what you're doing and your practices to see if you're on the right track to comply with the law. And that's kind of what we do. We're really just there to share what the law is and how you can comply. We're not enforcing it. We're not regulating who is or is not. That's something the DOJ pays attention to. So again, really the purpose is simple. It just says that you are taking the steps and you're committing to access and inclusion. And for us and adaptive golfers around the country, that means everything. You get a certificate when you complete it. We would certainly recognize those facilities that have got the certificate or received the certificate, but it's not a certification. It just says that you're on the right path. And so we'd like to see more and more folks just take the steps to, do an assessment of themselves and identify what they need to do to meet the criteria for the ADA. All right, so the big ticket items for the self-assessment are what we're going to get into today. And I'm going to talk about a few of these briefly, and I'm going to give it to Jan. Do you have an accessible website? Do you publish policies so that folks can understand what's going on at your golf course before they get there and before a situation happens at the counter that was preventable? Are you training your staff top to bottom across all departments on how to interact and work with individuals with disabilities? And how do you stand from an ADA compliance standpoint related to your golf course? And of course, the buildings. Most of the buildings are less of an issue, typically speaking, than the golf course themselves, but Jan will talk about that in more detail. So as far as an accessible website, I think some of you probably have those. Some of you do not. It can be I wouldn't say cost prohibitive, but it's not free to turn a website into a compliant website. And there are companies out there that will do that and advise you on how to do that. And your IT folks should know how to do that. I will tell you, there are widgets that are out there that are called plugins. And just to be, brutally honest with you here, there are plenty of the industry on the web design industry and on the legal side that do not believe widgets meet the full criteria for ADA and WCAG compliance, even though there are thousands and thousands and thousands of businesses using them out there. So we use one right now simply because it's affordable and we're really not selling anything. But when it comes to having an accessible website, it's something you should consider doing because, again, folks that are at home that have different types of disabilities have gear and hardware that allows them to view your website regardless of their impairment, whether it's sensory, hearing, or vision, or whatever it may be, if your website has the right kind of fonts and has the right kind of alt tags on images and things like that. So we're working on putting some education together on this to make that a little more understandable. But you got to remember that the website, regardless of whether it's accessible or not right now, that is where you've got your chance to make your first impression and communicate to golfers that are interested in playing your facility what they can expect when they get there from an accessibility standpoint. One of those things is just a statement talking about how valuable you believe all golfers are to your property. This does mean a lot. And so this is one small template. There's larger templates, but you can see these accessibility statements on our GiA&x as well in our resources section. So when it comes to policies and marketing, and I'm saying this, I've got my operator hat on now. it's nobody likes to put everything in writing. Websites can get busy, but golfers with disabilities are going to want to know before they show up to your property. No different than if they're making a hotel reservation. Do you or do you not have an adaptive cart yet? Do you maybe have one, but you share it? So, advanced notice is recommended. All right. Is it okay to call ahead to find out if they are off the path today, or are we cart path only? Is it so wet that you are not using access flags or allowing access flags in the state so folks can get closer to the green where some folks may not be able to? A little bit of communication on the front end goes a long way to do that before people show up to your property. So again, that's something that we like to see is from a self-assessment. It's something you should be doing. We've got those policies highlighted on our micro learning lessons on our public website, as well as in the onboarding series. They're in more detail. So if you do the onboard series training, you can see the policies as well. You can also see the policy templates and download them on GiA&x, as I showed you earlier in the presentation, right? And again, the most common ones that come up are cart path only scenarios, adaptive golf car use, and service animals. And another one that's coming up lately involves, geofencing. I'm a fan of geofencing. I like it as an operator, but the reality is that 30 yards may not be close enough for some golfers. So the staff needs to work on being flexible when flexibility is not an issue, with always remembering that the course may absolutely always protect their golf course from damage from whatever that may be a result of, whether it's heavy rains, whether they're protecting the course because maintenance is going on, or chemical applications. But the key on access is to not create denial of access situations when they don't have to exist. And if you've got mowers out on the golf course and mowers on the greens, denying access closer to the green is when some courses can find themselves, in trouble. And so we just advise you to think about that with your policies, and remember that it's okay to have a policy, but be prepared to be a little bit flexible when you need to be, and it's not going to open up a fire hose of other people trying to do it, which I know is a common fear. Liability questions always come up. It's a liability issue. Well, there's liability issues for 120 golfers at a scramble when half of them have a six-pack before 8 a.m. So liability gets thrown around a lot in these sorts of things. And so again, step back and just seek access, seek ways to let people play golf when it's feasible to do to, and there's really not a good reason not to. Imagery in your clubhouse or on your website or socials is a great way to show that you support adaptive golf. Maybe you've got some members that don't mind their photograph being taken on the golf course, whether they are disabled, maybe they're a seated golfer, maybe they have a prosthetic leg or arm and they don't mind being part of your imagery. But again, a picture or two sends a pretty strong message. Training is very important. It's probably number one. So we would highly encourage any facility to ensure that their leadership and their staff that is forward facing with customers across all departments goes through this training. It takes about 2.5 hours to complete all of it. It's broken up into 6 lessons. The first one's very short. It's just an introduction, and you could stop anytime you want to, take a break, because it's on a learning management system platform that supports that. So when we do the self-assessment, do you have an accessible website? Are you conducting training? Are 2 things we're looking about. And are you incorporating policies on your website and publishing them so that golfers with disabilities know what to expect when they get there? Because as we all know, culture starts at the top and it feeds down from there. And so I'm going to turn over here to Jan very quickly here, and Jan's going to finish up with what we're going to talk about, which is barrier-free stuff. And what it comes down to, is, can an individual get there, get to the parking lot, make it through the entire golf course, use the clubhouse, use all the amenities without having to go around something, whether that's the food and beverage department, whether that's the sauna, whether that's the locker room. Bottom line is they've got to be able to access the areas of the golf facility inside and out that are available to the public. And so I believe, Jan, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak with all the folks who are interested in this, because if it hadn't been up and coming, it is now. What Dave had said earlier, that the access is key. And it's how do you navigate that barrier free? And I think that you really are probably doing better than you think, and shouldn't have as much fear or trepidation as perhaps many people have when you start asking them about the ADA and golf courses. The facilities themselves, the building facilities, are generally covered through architecture. The building cannot be built unless it meets the codes. It meets the ADA codes for compliance. So, but the golf course is completely different, as Dave mentioned early. It was in the early 2000s that the Department of Justice, that's DOJ for those who didn't know, the Department of Justice reached out to try to find out what would make all recreational facilities more accessible. And I'm delighted to say that I was among the folks who were at the outset discussing that, especially for me from a golf course design standpoint. As Dave mentioned earlier, you want to have the access from the parking lot through all areas and amenities of the club, inside the clubhouse and outside. And that does include the driving range and the practice areas, as well as the entire golf course, so that people with disabilities can have the same experience. When we have, when you're looking for a checklist, you see on this slide, look at the bottom left, and you'll see Institute for Human-Centered Design. And these are the folks who actually put together this checklist, and it was courtesy of all the input by people with disabilities, as people who are golf course architects and other recreational designers. If you can look at this checklist, as Dave said, it's for you to know how well you are doing. You may find after you go through this checklist once that you might want to do it again in another year or 2 years just to see how far you've come. Of course, keep a record of what you had done, but obviously you look at the buildings. If you look at this image, you can see from the parking lot, you can get to the cart storage area, you can get to the clubhouse, you get to the practice green, and then on over to the first golf hole. Next. Here's a much better example that shows you, you can see in the yellow box, this is an example of an interactive slide from our lessons. So if you click on the number 1, it will give you information there. And that's the parking. And then you see number 2, the accessible route. And it shows us to be a minimum of 36 inches wide. That's for particularly based on folks who might be using wheelchairs. However, getting from the parking lot to the clubhouse generally has a wider path. And if it's for a mobility device, the 36 inches is probably still pretty good. That gets you into the clubhouse at number 3, and then you can get to the golf cart rental. Note that when you see the golf cart path, that it's shown to be a minimum of 48 inches wide. Most of the times you'll find a golf cart path on a golf course 8 feet wide. And the reason is that it keeps the cart path intact and still usable by wide axle vehicles like trucks or other maintenance equipment necessary for mowing or aerifying, spraying the golf course. So then you go up to 5, the driving range must be accessible. Either one space or 5% of the stalls that are available should be accessible to people with disabilities. What that means is that golf car, the mobility device used by that person, can get onto that into that practice stall, and the person can take golf swings the same as everybody else. Then from the driving range, get over to the practice putting green, and that means that the person with a disability in a mobility device can access that putting green. Obviously, those who don't have mobility devices and might need crutches to get around, those folks are generally careful about if there are any indentations, because like every other golfer, they want to leave the golf course in as good a condition as they found it. Then of course, accessing the first golf hole. So here, these are some of the things on the checklist, and so can we get to the golf facility checklist? these are the questions, and you can see these are based on the 2010 standards. And the standards have not changed. The Department of Justice had a review in 2012, and they finalized the 2010 standards in 2012, and there have been no changes since. So there is no update. That's why you're able to use this list, even though it's copyrighted 2016. So the first thing is there an accessible route to the entrance of the golf facility? Yes, and you can see the grade should be at a 1 in 20 maximum slope. That means for every 20 feet, you can go up only 1 foot. And that's deemed accessible for somebody using a wheelchair to go up that grade. So the possible solution, if it's not, is you install a ramp or a platform lift, or use a limited use access elevator. Then is there an accessible route or golf car passage? The accessible route does not have to be a paved route throughout. It's, can a golf car get there? That means once the golf car gets to the tee, can the person get to the fairway? Sometimes it's getting from the tee onto a path and then exiting the path onto the fairway. And if there is a path that has curbs in it at the fairway area, every 75 yards there needs to be a 60-inch wide, a 5-foot wide opening, so that the golf car, the mobility device, can exit the path and get onto the fairway, and vice versa. So these are the other areas. Here you can see at the top of the page, if there's a curb, then you need to have 60 inches wide at intervals 75 yards apart. So you can either remove the curb, alter the curb, or change the barrier, or totally remove the barriers. And as far as teeing grounds go, there are no boxes in the rules of golf. There are teeing grounds. So if there is a tee that has, most of them are maybe 20 feet deep, 15 to 20 feet deep. So when you look at the image that says 2 club lengths, that's presuming the longest club. That would be a driver. And for a shorthand, you can just say 10 feet. So if there's 10 feet there, can the golf car get, or mobility device, get on that path, get on the tee? Yes. However, it may not be able to get there because of the topography. That may prevent that. So if there is 1 or 2 teeing grounds per hole, at least one of those teeing grounds must be accessible. It doesn't state which. The preference is to have the most forward one, but 1 or 2 teeing grounds. If there are 3 or more teeing grounds per hole, then at least 2 teeing grounds must be accessible. So this means that you all may have been at golf courses where there's more than 1 set of markers on a teeing ground. So the teeing ground is defined as 2 club lengths behind the markers. And that's also why it's not a box. So it's that, those are the limits. You're not meant to tee up in front of the markers, but then you have up to 2 club lengths behind the markers. So again, this is where a golf car can get onto the tee and the player can play from his or her mobility device. All right.
Yep. And Jan, I think I'll add something too, if I can. It's Dave here real
Sure.
quick. You know, we've just showed you 2 pages here of what is really only a 7-page checklist with these kind of pictures on there. And so the ability to grab that checklist, jump in a golf cart, and drive around your golf course is a pretty easy thing to do, to kind of just see where you stand. And so all these pictures and drawings in here, that first interactive slide that Jan showed you, this is where that material comes from. And so, you know, it's a short checklist with the basic information you need to meet the criteria. So it's pretty easy to accomplish. And with Jan, I'll change the slide for you there.
Okay, thank you. So the next question becomes, do these standards apply to my facility? And when do I have to comply? And then how do I pay for that for complying? And are there any tax breaks? So let's start with the standards. So this goes back to what I was saying, that the courses or associated buildings constructed between 2015 and 2010 and March 15, 2012, the owners can choose the 1991 or the 2010 ADA standards. 1991 standards preceded the ones that, and that are more elaborate and also more descriptive than the 1991. So the courses and the buildings constructed on or after March 15th, 2012, the owners must use the 2010 ADA standards. And that's because that's when the Department of Justice, the DOJ, approved the 2010 ADA standards. So what if your facility or buildings or golf course was built before 2015 or in 2010, and you're now doing new construction or alterations? Well, again, there's a difference between the facility, meaning the buildings, and the golf course. The 1991 guidelines would still apply if the buildings were built in 98. But if they're now doing alterations or new construction, then the 2010 ADA standards would apply. And for golf courses, there were no standards existed for golf prior to 2010. So if you're going to be doing any alterations, let's go to the next one and see. Okay, so part of this depends on what it is that may be changing on the golf course. If you're merely going to be regrassing, not changing any grades, not moving tees, not building tees, just regrassing, then none of this applies. But if you're going to build a new tee, then the new tee must comply with the standards. So unless if you're building a new back tee, then but you have two more forward tees already that comply, that back tee does not have to comply because you have already met the criteria. As far as putting greens, if you're rebuilding a putting green, it applies if you are rebuilding. And probably the easiest thing I can help you with, and Dave kind of mentioned it earlier, is if your triplex mower can get onto the putting green, can get onto the tee, then it is likely that the mobility device and the golf car can get onto the tee and get onto the putting green. So that's what makes it accessible. So if you're going to, if you're doing some planning and you want to offset some of the compliance costs, you go to irs.gov, and here you can see there's some examples for small businesses, which is $1 million or less in revenue with 30 or fewer employees, and they can take up to a $5,000 credit for eligible expenses. But the eligible part just really needs to be defined. So you might need to have your accountant help you with this, but this is the short of it, and it's not much more complex than what I'm saying. Just be sure you understand what is in the IRS document. But the barrier removal and accessibility services, printed material in alternate formats, and provision or modification of equipment, those will be covered. But it's not applicable for barrier removal if the facility was placed in service after November 5th, 1990, because November 5th, 1990, after that was when the first ADA compliance rules were written for buildings. And again, here's the tax deduction. Again, irs.gov, up to $15,000 per year. And then we talk about readily achievable. What does that mean? But before we do, so this is readily achievable. Business owners in existing facilities that are not being renovated, you make changes that are easily accomplishable without much difficulty or expense. It's right out of their document. And the reason for that is every business is different. When you have a very dense population near a large city, there are more people generally supporting the facility, and they may be able to do more. If you have a multi-course owner with many more people both employed and serviced, then they probably have the ability to accomplish without much difficulty or expense. So determining that is obviously the responsibility of each business, and it varies, just as we talked about. So again, what would be readily achievable at a high volume resort is different than at a small public golf course that works on very thin margins. So small businesses or family owned properties, it's completely different than when you have a larger parent company. However, all businesses are required to remove architectural barriers, even if they're buildings. So again, we're talking about buildings. This may mean something for you with a halfway house or with toilet facilities on the golf course. Dave, from here, why don't you pick it up?
Okay, well, thank you, Jan. And again, I know we've thrown a lot of stuff your way today, but again, those components of the self-assessment, as we talked about, really involve, just verifying what you have. Do you have an accessible website? Do you have some good published policies on there that help inform people? Are you conducting training so that your staff is better informed? And have you gone through the process of determining if your facility is barrier-free and in compliance with many of the elements that Jan went over? That's pretty much what it comes down to be able to say to someone that your facility is accessible. And, the accessibility part of being, the facility being accessible, again, leads to part two, which is, a staff and a leadership and the staff that believes in this and is developing a culture that ensures that everyone that wants to play your facility is welcomed. At the next session, we will go over the onboarding training series. We'll break out some key elements of each of the session topics. We'll talk about policies a little bit more in detail, give you some more examples of some of those. We'll just overview that and make sure you know where to find them. And again, kind of the carrot for that is we would hope that folks would want to do that anyway. Just because of the law that went into place in 1990 to be better informed. But the organizations listed there have been gracious enough to provide education credits by doing it, which is a nice little benefit. I know the PGA cycle is coming up at the end next year. I'm not sure about the other associations, so it's a good way to get a couple hours worth of credits. Frank, I'm not sure. I don't know if we have any questions or not yet. While we're double checking there, I just wanted to throw out a thank you to Bill Walker. Let me get my screen back on here. Bill wasn't able to join us today, I don't believe, but let me get this back up here real quick. Big shout to Bill Walker and of course Santana for helping us put this together today. We really appreciate the opportunity to speak whenever we can, because that's really, again, what we do. We're really an education and advocacy organization, and we want to do it in a way that is helpful. Again, we're not an enforcement agency, but we're hoping folks will listen to us so they don't have to listen to somebody else in the wrong room, in the wrong courthouse, I guess is the best way to say it. Looks like we've got several AGAs on the call today: Nevada, Sun Country, Michigan, Metropolitan Minnesota, Ontario, awesome, Arizona, Southwest PGA, and Kentucky. For the Kentucky AGA, I'm from Hopkinsville, just as an FYI. So if you want to talk about Hopkinsville, Kentucky, give me a shout out. That's my home. And a couple closing thoughts as well. Really when it comes to where the AGAs fall into this, I know we probably got some we got AGAs on here too, but we probably have some operators. Obviously, this information is designed, for operators. Of course, where the AGAs come into play is if you're hosting events or helping coordinate programs at your member courses and the facilities in your area. You need to be aware of what these rules and regulations state, and why it's important to work with facilities that are accessible, or if they've got areas they need to improve in order to have an adaptive golf event or tournament, help them understand better what they need to do by advocating with these things and these tools that you may freely use. As I mentioned, we've got a couple AGAs that have started to use our volunteer training because they've got adaptive golf tournaments coming up. We would really encourage you to check that out, and I'd be happy to talk with you about that at any time to help you understand how easy it is to share that with your folks. And again, Join and Gain is a great way to kind of expand your network and your connections around this place. There's several AGAs around the country that are doing a really good job and are not necessarily ahead of the game, but have got some great resources and examples from which to draw from as far as adaptive golf programming and what they've set up on their website to help their member courses in their particular regions or states. And so they're out there, and I'd be happy to have a conversation with you about that as well. And, with that, Frank, I'm not sure if we have any questions or not.
Yeah.
Jan, do you have anything you wanted to add? Or go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, so a good question's been posed. Is there a database of golf courses that have been reviewed and determined to be accessible?
Great question. No, and that's one of the reasons we started the self-assessment was to simply kind of get a better feel for something that we could talk about in a positive way in the golf industry. Obviously, there's whatever the number is today. I don't know if it's 14,500 or 15,000, give or take 500, whatever the number of golf courses is today. It would be awesome if we could say that, these are courses that, have gone through this process, that have taken that step to demonstrate that they are, accessible facilities. That said, as just what Jan mentioned, there are plenty of golf courses out there that are very likely doing much better than they might think they are, right? And I think simply knowing that you're doing a good job in a lot of areas will free up a lot of angst about potential cost and things like that, because unfortunately, I think things get blown out of proportion sometimes with a little bit of maybe a little fear of the unknown. The ADA is a complicated document. It's a huge government document, but so what we've done is kind of distilled it down into the usable parts, and we're pretty confident that if you can kind of get aligned with what we suggest and how we've broken it down, that your phone's not going to ring because you're failing to do something you should be doing. Jan, would you agree with that?
Sure, I would say yes, overall that's true. And part of this comes down to recognizing, I think the most important thing here is determining what is barrier free. And there are barriers, if there is a geofence, as you had mentioned earlier, which might be attached to some of the latest and greatest golf carts. You cannot go beyond the GPS line, but those can be dismantled for certain people who need those. But I do believe that it's probably in your best interest to be sure that whomever's using that, the non-geofenced golf cart probably has a tag on it so that people understand that it is somebody with a disability, and don't feel that it's everybody should be able to drive not just near the green, because those golf cars and mobility devices will go on the green and will go on the tees, and they are permitted. And just so you're aware, the pounds per square inch for the mobility device and for the golf cars are, especially the mobility device, is less than the PSI, pounds per square inch, for the maintenance equipment for the triplex mowers that might be on both the tees and the greens. Again, I'll repeat, the folks who are in those mobility devices want the greens, want the tees to be in as good a condition as they can be for their own play as well as for others. So they're not going to be turning donuts or making sharp turns on the green, because they know that could affect their putts as well. So they're very careful about what they do and where they go. And one of the other things is bunkers. Bunkers do not have to be accessible. The practice bunker should be accessible, meaning that a mobility device can drive into it and exit it, but not bunkers on the golf course. The USGA has worked with folks with disabilities, especially mobility disabilities, to create the rules of golf, exceptions to the rules of golf for people with disabilities. And you can find that at usga.org, and that would be helpful. So, and probably the only other thing I'd mention is reminding you that sometimes if everybody can't use the golf course, then it's not excluding anyone. I was at in McMinnville, Oregon. I wanted to see the Spruce Goose. Spruce Goose was a 100-yard wide wooden airplane built by Howard Hughes, and they shipped it in 8 sections up to Oregon from California. And it was all ready to go, but the elevator did not receive a certificate of occupancy. And because not everybody could get in there, nobody could get in. So it's the other way around. So golf course with which I'm familiar had the insurance company for the golf course did not permit people to use golf carts on the fairways because the left side of the fairway was an 87-foot drop down to water. And it was a liability for the golf course, for the insurance company. So cart paths only on that hole. So again, if it applies to everybody, it's not exclusionary. So if you can understand those things, it might help that it applies to everyone or it applies to no one. It's truly inclusive.
Thank you, Jan.
Sure.
Frank, any other questions there?
No other questions. Maybe if you'd like to use the last minute or so, just remind some folks about the volunteer training for adaptive competitions. I know some of the AGAs you mentioned, I do believe still have their adaptive opens coming up.
Yeah, thanks. Mentioned that briefly a moment ago, but again, we're real proud of that. It's easy to use, and it really gets into disability etiquette and communications. Again, the whole goal there is, just to help folks be more comfortable in that environment who might not have worked with individuals with disabilities before. And so again, we're real proud of it, and the feedback we're getting from the AGAs that have accessed it and started to share it with their volunteers has been very positive. And again, it's something that we've generated. There's no fee for this stuff. We just want people to take advantage of it so they can have better events and better experiences for everybody involved, competitors and volunteers. I will do one very, very brief plug. Many of you on this call, your AGAs, we put out a survey recently related to where all the adaptive golf cars are in the country. Now, we're never going to really know that. It's kind of a moving target, but it's been a little bit of an enigma for a while because there's not a lot of them out there where they need to be, and that's just the reality of it. They're not inexpensive, but what we want to do is work to establish a much better national picture of where they are. And the main purpose of that is so that golfers who are traveling around the country can go to a place and find out if the facility has that vehicle or not, or if they share that vehicle with someone. Also, AGAs, it would help you if you're having an adaptive golf event to know if there's some in your area. It might save you some pretty good logistics costs for moving carts around if you're going to have an adaptive golf tournament, if you got some of those vehicles closer by. So that's the whole purpose of that survey that the USGA, a couple regional directors had us help send out. To date, we've got 25 of 50 states and or AGAs that have responded. So quite a few have not responded, and it could mean they did not get the notification that we thought went out, or that they just haven't had a time to send it out. But I would encourage you to use that survey link we sent out and engage with your member facilities in your state or region and truly find out who's got adaptive golf cars for that segment of seated golfers who need those to play. It's but one segment of the entire population of golfers with disabilities, but it is the segment that for the most part requires most of the logistics assistance to play golf because they need a vehicle to do that. And so a great way to get your foot in that door if you're an operator is to share one with another property near you. Even if it's a competitor, it's a win-win situation for both of you if you can cut the cost in half by sharing it. And with that, I'll just leave you with that. But if you want more information about getting that survey out, all you're doing is helping our organization help gather this information. But we did this in coordination with the United States Adaptive Golf Alliance, the Seated Golfers Association, and the United States Disabled Golf Association. And the IAGA supported it when it went out. And so it's information that we are going to share, okay, with everybody as far as where these golf cars are at. So it's very, very important, as important as policies on your website, so people know what your accessibility features are. Frank, that's all I've got. I think, Jan, we're done as well. Unless there's any other questions, Frank, Santana, we'll turn it back over. Oh, go ahead, Jan.
Just one more thing. Understand that that not all golf mobility devices fit every person with a disability. So not every people's physiques are different, people's disabilities are different, but still do the best you can to accommodate those. You truly can.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you. Yep, that's true. Seated golfers, depending on their impairment, can get different medical situations developing with their lower back or lower extremities, depending on what type of vehicle they're able to sit in. Okay, Frank, last call for questions. If not, Santana, we'll turn it back over to you. And again, we really appreciate y'all's time today. We'll hope you'll visit us in a month or so, because we'll get a little bit more into just the other education, which is a more well-rounded, not quite as specific as this about, where you can get those education credits.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate being here. Appreciate you being part of this.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Just want to kind of close out here a few things. I think Frank answered this in the chat, but we are planning to share this recorded webinar and presentation with our members by early next week. And then just really want to close out by once again relaying our appreciation for you guys' attendance. And Dave, Jan, and Frank, thank you guys so much for being here today. If anyone has any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. My email is shipley@iaga.org. I hope everyone has a great rest of the week. Thank you so much.
Thank y'all.
Thanks. Thanks, Santana.
Thank you guys.